In a world where royal families often seem distant and untouchable, sometimes a single photograph can bridge the gap between palace walls and ordinary living rooms. When the Prince and Princess of Wales shared their New Year snapshot, millions of people around the world stopped scrolling through their social media feeds. There was something different about this image, something that made strangers smile, made parents hug their children a little tighter, and reminded everyone that beneath the crowns and titles, love looks remarkably the same in every family. What made this particular moment so special? Why did a simple family photograph become the most shared royal image of the year? The answer lies not just in what the camera captured, but in the beautiful, imperfect, gloriously human story that led to that magical moment. This is that story, a tale of genuine love, unexpected challenges, small victories, and the kind of authentic joy that reminds us all why we believe in fairness, tales that come true. Catherine Middleton had never been one to believe in perfect moments, but, as she stood in the drawing room of Adelaide Cottage on New Year's Eve morning, she found herself wondering if perhaps they did exist after all. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting golden patterns across the Persian rug where her 3 children were sprawled in various states of morning dishevelment. George, now 11 and growing taller by the day, was attempting to teach Charlotte the proper way to shuffle cards while 9-year-old Louis entertained himself by building an elaborate fortress out of sofa cushions. William emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of steaming mugs, his hair still tousled from sleep, wearing the comfortable sweater Catherine had given him for Christmas. It was navy blue with a small coffee stain near the left shoulder, evidence of yesterday's breakfast chaos when Louis had decided to demonstrate his juggling skills with unfortunate timing. Most people would have changed into something pristine for photographs, but William had simply laughed when Catherine pointed out the stain, saying it made him look more like a real father and less like a museum piece. The decision to take a family photograph had come spontaneously. They had been discussing their hopes for the new year over breakfast when Charlotte had suggested they should capture the moment. Not with the formal photographers who usually documented their public appearances, but with Catherine's own camera, the same digital camera she had been using to photograph her children since George was born. There was something wonderfully ordinary about the idea that appealed to them both. Catherine had learned photography during her university years, initially as a way to document her travels, but it had evolved into something more meaningful over the years. Through her lens, she had captured countless precious moments: George's first steps in the garden at Anmer Hall, Charlotte's gap-toothed grin after losing her first tooth, Louis's triumphant expression after finally learning to ride his bicycle without training wheels. These photographs filled albums that lived on their bookshelves, far removed from the official portraits that would eventually hang in galleries and museums. The morning had unfolded with the kind of gentle chaos that characterized most of their family days. There had been a minor crisis when George couldn't find his favorite book, a brief negotiation about whether Louis could wear his dinosaur pajamas all day, and Charlotte's announcement that she had decided to become a veterinarian who specializes in treating dragons. William had handled each situation with the patient humor that Catherine had fallen in love with years ago, before titles and duties had complicated their lives. As she adjusted the camera settings, Catherine reflected on how much their lives had changed since their wedding day in 2011. Back then, everything had felt so formal, so carefully orchestrated. Every public appearance was planned months in advance, every photograph scrutinized by teams of advisors. But parenthood had softened the edges of royal protocol, creating space for spontaneity and genuine emotion. The children had given them permission to be imperfect, to laugh at themselves, to prioritize family moments over royal obligations. George looked up from his card shuffling lesson and noticed his mother preparing the camera. "Are we taking pictures again?" he asked with the resigned tone of a child who had posed for countless family photos. Catherine smiled at her eldest son, recognizing in his expression the same mixture of patience and mild exasperation that William sometimes wore during official photo sessions. "Just a few," Catherine promised. "Nothing formal. Just us being us." She had learned that the best family photographs happened when everyone forgot about the camera, when they were simply enjoying each other's company. The trick was to take enough pictures that eventually everyone relaxed and their genuine personalities emerged. William settled onto the sofa beside Charlotte, who immediately climbed into his lap with the confidence of a child who had never doubted her place in her father's affections. Louis abandoned his cushioned fortress and joined the group, bringing with him a stuffed lion that had been his constant companion for the past 2 years. The lion was slightly shabby now, with one ear that stuck out at an odd angle after her unfortunate encounter with the family dog, but Louis loved it all the more for its imperfections. The natural light in the room was perfect, soft and warm without being harsh. Catherine had positioned herself so that the light fell gently across their faces, highlighting the features that made each of her children unique. George had William's eyes and her own stubborn chin. Charlotte possessed an expressive face that could shift from angelic to mischievous in seconds. Louis had inherited William's sense of humor and an infectious laugh that could dissolve the most serious moments into giggles. As Catherine began taking photographs, she noticed the small details that made this moment special. William's hand resting protectively on Charlotte's back. George's careful attention to his younger brother's comfort as they arranged themselves for the picture. The way Louis held his stuffed lion like a treasured friend rather than trying to hide it because he thought he was too old for stuffed animals. These were the details that transformed a simple family portrait into a story of love and connection. The conversation flowed naturally as Catherine worked. They talked about their plans for the new year, the books they wanted to read, the places they hoped to visit. William mentioned a camping trip he had been planning, and the children's excitement was immediate and vocal. Charlotte wanted to know if they could roast marshmallows, George asked about hiking trails, and Louis was primarily concerned about whether his stuffed lion would be allowed in the tent. Catherine found herself thinking about the contrast between this moment and their public appearances. When they attended official functions, everything was choreographed. They knew where to stand, when to smile, how to position themselves for the best angles. But, here, in their own home, with no one watching except the family dog who had wandered in and was now napping in a patch of sunlight, they could simply exist as themselves. The photographs Catherine was taking would eventually be shared with the world, but, in this moment, they belonged entirely to the family. She captured William's genuine laughter when Louis told a joke about dinosaurs. She photographed Charlotte's concentration as she tried to master George's card shuffling technique. She documented George's patient older brother expression as he helped Louis arrange his stuffed animal collection for the group photo. Between pictures, they talked about ordinary things. William mentioned a conversation he had with a farmer during a recent visit to Wales. Charlotte described a book she was reading about horses. George shared his thoughts about a documentary he had watched about marine biology. Louis contributed observations about the behavior of the family's chickens, delivered with the serious authority of someone who considered himself an expert on poultry. Catherine realized that these conversations, captured between camera clicks, were as precious as the photographs themselves. In years to come, she would remember not just how they looked in these pictures, but what they talked about, how they laughed together, the way the morning sun filled their living room with golden light. The photograph would trigger memories of this entire experience, not just the moment when the shutter clicked. The session continued for nearly an hour, but it never felt forced or formal. When Louis got restless, they took a break for hot chocolate. When Charlotte wanted to show off a dance she had learned, Catherine photographed that too. When George decided he wanted to include the family dog in some pictures, they spent 10 minutes trying to convince the sleepy animal to participate in their family portrait session. Through it all, William remained the steady center of their small chaos. He had a gift for making each child feel important, for listening to their stories with genuine interest, for responding to their questions with thoughtful answers rather than dismissive reassurance. Catherine had fallen in love with his kindness years ago, but watching him as a father had deepened her appreciation for the man she had married. As the morning progressed, Catherine found herself thinking about the year behind them and the year ahead. 2024 had brought both challenges and joys, as most years did. There had been difficult moments, times when the pressure of public life felt overwhelming, when the children struggled with the unique challenges of growing up in the spotlight, when she and William questioned whether they were making the right choices for their family. But there had also been beautiful moments, quiet evenings at home, family vacations where they could simply be tourists, school events where they cheered from the sidelines like any other parents. The ordinary moments had sustained them through the extraordinary pressures of their public roles. Looking ahead to 2025, Catherine felt hopeful. The children were growing more confident in their own identities, more capable of handling the attention that came with their family name. William had found his stride in his charitable work, discovering ways to use his platform to address issues he cared deeply about. And she had learned to balance her public duties with her private priorities, creating space for the family life they all cherished. The photograph session was winding down naturally when Charlotte made an observation that would stay with Catherine for years to come. "Mummy," her daughter said, looking up from where she was arranging flowers from their garden into a small bouquet, "I like that we take pictures of regular days, not just special ones." "Regular days are special too, aren't they?" Catherine paused, her finger hovering over the camera's shutter button. Out of the mouths of babes, she thought. Charlotte was absolutely right. The most meaningful photographs in their family albums weren't from formal occasions or official events. They were from mornings like this one, unremarkable days that were remarkable simply because they were shared with people they loved. The final photograph of the session happened almost by accident. Catherine was adjusting her camera settings when Louis did something silly that made everyone laugh. Without thinking, she lifted the camera and captured the moment, William's head thrown back in genuine amusement, George grinning widely, Charlotte's delighted giggle, Louis beaming with pride at having entertained his family. It was unguarded and natural and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. As Catherine reviewed the images on her camera's small screen, she realized they had created something special. These weren't just photographs, they were windows into their family's soul. Anyone who looked at these pictures would see not just the Prince and Princess of Wales with their children, but a family that genuinely enjoyed each other's company, parents who delighted in their children, siblings who cared for each other despite the occasional squabble. The morning sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across the room, and the children were beginning to show signs of restlessness. It was time to move on to other activities, lunch needed to be prepared, afternoon plans awaited. But Catherine lingered for a moment, savoring the contentment that filled their living room like warm honey. William caught her eye and smiled, the smile that had first captured her attention during their university days. It was a smile that spoke of shared secrets and inside jokes, of challenges faced together and joys multiplied by sharing. In his expression, she saw her partner in parenting, her companion in the strange journey of royal life, her friend who understood the weight of public expectations and the importance of private moments. The photograph session was over, but the memory it had created would last far beyond any individual image. This had been one of those perfect imperfect moments that would weave itself into their family's story, becoming part of the foundation upon which their children would build their own understanding of love and family and home. The afternoon that followed their impromptu photo session found Catherine in her small office on the second floor of Adelaide Cottage, carefully reviewing the morning's photographs on her computer screen. The room was her sanctuary, decorated with family photos, children's artwork, and the kind of organized chaos that comes from balancing motherhood with public duties. Sunlight filtered through white curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny celebrations of the peaceful moment. Each photograph told a story. Catherine scrolled through dozens of images, watching her family's morning unfold in digital frames. There was William adjusting Louis's collar with paternal tenderness. George explaining something important to Charlotte with the serious expression of an 11-year-old who took his role as big brother seriously. Charlotte mid-laugh, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Louis clutching his stuffed lion while simultaneously trying to appear grown-up for the camera. But it was the candid shots that captured Catherine's attention most completely. The unguarded moments between poses when her family simply existed in their own space, comfortable and content. William's hand brushing Charlotte's hair from her face. George sharing his hot chocolate with Louis without being asked. The family dog wandering through the frame, completely oblivious to the fact that he was photobombing what might become a historically significant family portrait. Catherine had developed her eye for photography over many years, starting with a basic course during her art history studies at St. Andrews. Initially, it had been about technical skill, understanding aperture and shutter speed, learning to work with natural light, mastering the art of composition. But parenthood had transformed her relationship with photography from academic exercise to emotional necessity. The camera had become her way of stopping time, of preserving moments that would otherwise blur into the general happiness of family life. She paused at one particular image that made her breath catch slightly. It showed William and all three children in profile, their faces turned towards something outside the frame, probably the family cat making an appearance on the windowsill. What struck her was how clearly the photograph captured the love that flowed between them. It wasn't posed or artificial. It was simply there, as natural and essential as breathing. This was the photograph that would eventually be shared with the world, though Catherine didn't know it yet. Something about the image spoke to universal truths about family and love and the quiet joy of being together. It would resonate with parents in London and farmers in Yorkshire and families in countries whose names the children couldn't yet pronounce on maps. But, in this moment, it was simply one frame among many, waiting for its significance to be discovered. The process of selecting which photographs to share publicly was always complex. As members of the royal family, their private moments inevitably became public property, but Catherine and William had worked hard to maintain some control over how their family was presented to the world. They wanted to be authentic while still maintaining the dignity expected of their positions. They wanted to share their joy while protecting their children's privacy. It was a delicate balance that required constant adjustment. Catherine thought about the contrast between this intimate photo session and the formal portraits that documented their official lives. Those images served important purposes, they preserved history, they represented the monarchy, they fulfilled public expectations about royal presentation. But, these family photographs served a different purpose entirely. They reminded the world that beneath the titles and ceremonies and constitutional responsibilities lived real people who loved each other in wonderfully ordinary ways. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her sister Pippa, who was checking in about New Year's Eve plans. Catherine smiled as she typed her response, thinking about how normal family communication had become even as their circumstances had grown increasingly extraordinary. The texting and family group chats and casual phone calls that connected her to her siblings and parents provided essential anchoring in a life that could otherwise feel unmoored from ordinary experience. Through her office window, Catherine could see William and the children in the garden. George was teaching his younger siblings to play a modified version of cricket, using a tennis ball and improvised wickets made from garden stakes. Louis was enthusiastically swinging a child-sized bat with more enthusiasm than accuracy, while Charlotte provided running commentary on everyone's technique with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her own expertise. William was clearly enjoying himself, his laughter carrying across the lawn as Louis managed to connect with the ball and send it bouncing toward the flower beds. Catherine watched her husband chase after the wayward ball with exaggerated urgency, making Louis beam with pride at his powerful hit. These moments of playfulness came naturally to William, but Catherine knew they were also intentional. He had grown up with limited opportunities for spontaneous outdoor play, and he was determined that his children would have different experiences. The children's relationship with their royal identity was evolving as they grew older. George, as the eldest, was beginning to understand more fully what his future held. But all three children were learning to navigate the space between their public roles and their private selves. Catherine and William worked constantly to help them develop strong senses of individual identity that existed independently of their titles and future responsibilities. Photography had become one way of preserving their children's authentic selves. The formal royal portraits would show how they appeared at specific moments in history, but Catherine's personal photographs captured who they really were. George's quiet thoughtfulness, Charlotte's irrepressible spirit, Louis's joyful enthusiasm, these essential characteristics might evolve over time, but the core of who they were would remain constant. Catherine returned her attention to the computer screen, continuing her review of the morning's photographs. She found herself thinking about the technical aspects of the images. The lighting had been perfect, soft and even without being flat. The composition felt natural rather than forced. But, more importantly, the emotional content of the photographs felt genuine. These weren't people performing happiness for the camera, these were people actually experiencing joy together. The decision about which photograph to share publicly would require input from William, and probably from their private secretary as well. Any image released by the royal family underwent careful consideration. They needed to think about how it would be interpreted, what message it would send, whether it struck the right balance between accessibility and dignity. But Catherine hoped they would choose one of the more relaxed images, something that showed their family as they actually were rather than as idealized versions of themselves. Her computer chimed softly with an email notification. It was from her private secretary, forwarding requests from various charities hoping for royal patronage in the coming year. Catherine made a mental note to review the requests later. The work of being a royal patron was meaningful but required careful consideration. She wanted to support organizations that aligned with her values and where she could make a genuine contribution, not just serve as a decorative figurehead. The balance between public and private life was something Catherine and William discussed regularly. They both felt strongly that their children deserved as normal a childhood as possible, given their circumstances. But they also understood that public interest in their family was natural and largely benevolent. People found hope and happiness in their family's obvious contentment. The challenge was sharing enough to satisfy legitimate curiosity while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Catherine glanced at her watch and realized the afternoon was advancing more quickly than she had realized. Tea time was approaching, which in their household meant gathering in the kitchen for sandwiches and conversation about the day's activities. It was one of their most treasured family traditions, an unscheduled hour when everyone shared their experiences and plans. She selected a few favorite photographs from the morning session and saved them to a special folder labeled Family 2025. This folder would eventually join others on her hard drive, Family 2024, Family 2023, and so on, stretching back to George's birth. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she and William would scroll through these collections, marveling at how quickly their children were growing and changing. The photographs from this morning would become part of their family's permanent record, but they would also serve a larger purpose. When released to the public, they would offer a glimpse into the private happiness of a family that lived much of their lives under public scrutiny. They would remind people that love looks the same whether it exists in a palace or a council flat, whether it belongs to future kings and queens or to families whose names would never appear in history books. Catherine closed the laptop and prepared to join her family downstairs. The photographs were captured and preserved, but the day was still unfolding. Tea time awaited, followed by evening activities and bedtime stories and the countless small moments that would accumulate into tomorrow's memories. As she descended the stairs, she could hear the children's voices from the kitchen, animated discussion about their afternoon cricket match and plans for New Year's Eve. William's deeper voice wove through their chatter, asking questions and making suggestions with the engaged attention that made him such a wonderful father. The sounds of her family filled the house like music, creating the soundtrack to a life she sometimes still couldn't quite believe was really hers. The photographs from this morning had captured one beautiful moment in their ongoing story, but Catherine knew that the real magic happened in the spaces between pictures, in the conversations and laughter and ordinary tenderness that wove their separate selves into a family. The camera could freeze time, but love lived in the flowing stream of daily life, constant and renewing and inexhaustibly precious. In the kitchen, afternoon tea was already underway. George was carefully spreading jam on scones, Charlotte was arranging strawberries on plates with artistic precision, and Louis was explaining to his father the complex rules he had invented for garden cricket. William caught Catherine's eye as she entered the room and smiled the smile she had fallen in love with 15 years earlier. "How did the photos turn out?" he asked, and Catherine realized that in reviewing the images, she had been looking for the story they told. What she had found was even better than a story. She had found proof of a life lived with intention, with love, and with the kind of joy that transforms ordinary moments into treasures worth preserving forever. Evening settled over Adelaide Cottage like a comfortable blanket, bringing with it the familiar rhythm of family life winding down toward bedtime. The children had been bathed and were now in their pajamas, gathered in the living room for what had become their New Year's Eve tradition, a family movie night followed by a midnight countdown adapted for younger participants. Louis had claimed his favorite spot on the large sofa, snuggled against William with his ever-present stuffed lion. Charlotte sat cross-legged on the floor, braiding friendship bracelets with intense concentration, while George had positioned himself in the armchair with a book, though his attention kept drifting to the family conversation flowing around him. Catherine had finally shared the morning's photographs with William during their brief private moment while the children chose the evening's movie. They had huddled together over her laptop screen, scrolling through dozens of images that documented their spontaneous photo session. William's reactions had been everything Catherine had hoped for: genuine surprise at how natural the photos looked, quiet pride in how happy their children appeared, and particular delight at the candid shots that captured unguarded moments of sibling affection. "This one," William had said, pausing at the image of all four of them laughing at one of Louis's silly jokes. "There's something special about this one." Catherine had agreed immediately. The photograph captured not just their physical appearance but their essential dynamic as a family, the way they leaned toward each other, the genuine joy in their expressions, the comfortable intimacy that spoke of deep love and real friendship. But the decision about which photograph to share publicly was more complex than simply choosing their favorite image. Every royal family photograph became part of the historical record, analyzed by media outlets and royal watchers for hidden meanings and symbolic significance. Catherine and William had learned to consider multiple factors when sharing family images: the message it would send about the monarchy, the level of formality appropriate for different occasions, and the balance between public interest and family privacy. Tonight, as they watched their children debate the merits of various family-friendly films, Catherine found herself thinking about the broader context of royal photography. The images that documented their family would eventually join a collection stretching back generations: formal portraits of kings and queens, ceremonial photographs marking important occasions, and, increasingly, more intimate glimpses into royal family life. She and William represented a shift toward greater accessibility, but they still needed to maintain the dignity expected of their positions. The children finally settled on an adventure film that promised just enough excitement to keep everyone engaged without being too stimulating before bedtime. As the opening credits rolled, Catherine observed her family with the same attentive eye she had brought to the morning's photo session. Louis was already drowsy despite his protests that he was wide awake. Charlotte had abandoned her bracelet making to curl up next to Catherine. George had closed his book but remained in his chair, clearly feeling too mature to join the family cuddle pile but equally clearly enjoying the cozy atmosphere. "Mom," Charlotte said during a quiet moment in the film, "are you going to show people the pictures we took this morning?" The question was asked with the casual curiosity that characterized most of her daughter's inquiries, but Catherine recognized the deeper interest behind it. Charlotte was old enough to understand that her family's photographs might be shared with the world, and she was beginning to develop opinions about how she wanted to be presented publicly. "We're thinking about it," Catherine replied honestly. "Would that be okay with you?" She and William had made a commitment to include their children in decisions about public sharing when they were old enough to have informed opinions. The children's comfort with media attention was essential to maintaining the family's emotional well-being. "I think so," Charlotte said after considering the question seriously. "We looked happy. And we were happy. So it's not like pretending or anything." Her observation was surprisingly sophisticated for a 9-year-old, but Charlotte had grown up understanding that sometimes their private moments became public property. George looked up from his apparently abandoned book. "Will people write stories about the pictures?" he asked, demonstrating his developing awareness of media attention. As the eldest child, he was most conscious of their unusual circumstances and most thoughtful about the implications of public life. "Probably," William answered with characteristic honesty. "But the stories will mostly be about how nice it is to see families enjoying time together. Nothing scary or complicated." He had learned to address his children's questions about media attention directly, helping them understand what to expect without making them anxious about public interest in their lives. Louis, who had been quietly following the conversation despite his drowsy state, suddenly perked up with concern. "Will they see my lion?" he asked, clutching his stuffed animal protectively. The question made everyone smile, but Catherine answered it seriously. "If we choose a picture where your lion is visible, then, yes, some people might see him. Is that okay?" She wanted to honor Louis's attachment to his favorite toy while helping him understand the implications of public sharing. "I guess so," Louis said after thinking it over. "But only if they know his name is Courage and he's very brave." The declaration was delivered with such earnest importance that William had to cough to hide his laughter. "We'll make sure they know," Catherine promised solemnly, making a mental note to include the detail if they did share a photograph featuring the stuffed lion. The movie continued, but Catherine found her attention divided between the on-screen adventure and her contemplation of the morning's photographs. Each image told a slightly different story about their family. Some emphasized their closeness, others highlighted individual personalities, still others captured the comfortable chaos that characterized their daily life. The challenge was choosing an image that represented them authentically while serving the broader purpose of royal communication. During a particularly exciting scene in the film, Lewis abandoned his drowsy state and became fully animated, providing whispered commentary on the characters' choices and predicting plot developments with the confidence of someone who had seen many similar stories. His excitement was infectious, drawing smiles from his siblings and parents even when his predictions proved wildly inaccurate. Catherine realized that this moment, their family gathered together, sharing reactions to a story, enjoying each other's company without any external pressures, was exactly what the morning's photographs had captured. The images weren't just documentation of how they looked, they were evidence of how they related to each other, how they found joy in simple pleasures, how they maintained connection despite the unusual demands of their public roles. William reached over to squeeze Catherine's hand, a gesture so natural and automatic that she knew he wasn't even conscious of doing it. 15 years of marriage had created countless such moments of unconscious affection, small touches and shared glances that spoke of deep comfort with each other's presence. The morning's photographs had captured some of these moments, preserving evidence of a partnership that had not just endured but flourished under extraordinary circumstances. As the film reached its climax, Charlotte had moved to sit beside her father, sharing his armchair in a way that would have been impossible when she was smaller. Lewis had finally succumbed to drowsiness and was leaning heavily against William's other side. George remained in his separate chair but had scooted it closer to the family group, maintaining his developing independence while still clearly wanting to be part of the collective experience. Catherine found herself thinking about the different types of royal photographs that had shaped public perception over the decades. The formal portraits that emphasized dignity and continuity. The ceremonial images that documented important occasions. The working photographs that showed royals engaged in their official duties. And, increasingly, the family photographs that reminded people that royals were also parents and spouses and individuals with private lives worth protecting and celebrating. The balance between these different types of images was delicate. Too much formality could make the royal family seem distant and irrelevant. Too much informality could undermine the sense of special significance that made the monarchy meaningful to many people. Catherine and William were part of a generation that was consciously working to modernize royal communication while maintaining its essential dignity. The film was ending, and conversation naturally turned to New Year's resolutions. George wanted to read more books about science and maybe learn to play chess properly. Charlotte hoped to improve her writing and possibly learn to braid more complicated patterns. Lewis announced his intention to teach Courage the stuffed lion to perform tricks, a goal that prompted gentle questions about exactly what tricks a stuffed animal might be capable of learning. William shared his hope to spend more time outdoors with the children, possibly including the camping trip they had discussed that morning. Catherine mentioned her desire to take more family photographs, to document their ordinary days as well as special occasions. The conversation was relaxed and optimistic, full of the kind of gentle ambition that characterizes family planning. As they prepared to move toward bedtime routines, Catherine made her decision about the morning's photographs. She would recommend that they share the image of all four of them laughing together, the one that had caught William's attention earlier. It captured something essential about their family dynamic without revealing anything too private or intimate. It showed them as they genuinely were people who enjoyed each other's company and found frequent reasons to laugh together. The bedtime routine proceeded with its usual mixture of cooperation and negotiation. Teeth needed to be brushed, stories needed to be read, and various stuffed animals and comfort objects needed to be properly arranged for optimal sleep conditions. Catherine and William moved through these familiar tasks with the practiced efficiency of parents who had learned to work as a team. But, even as they focused on the practical requirements of getting 3 children ready for bed, Catherine found herself still thinking about the morning's photographs and what they represented. Those images had captured a moment in their family's ongoing story, but they had also documented something larger, the possibility of finding genuine happiness within circumstances that could easily become overwhelming. The decision to share their family photograph with the world was ultimately about hope. In a time when many people struggled with division and uncertainty, images of family love and authentic joy served a purpose beyond mere entertainment. They reminded viewers that connection was possible, that love could flourish even under difficult circumstances, that ordinary moments contained extraordinary beauty. As Catherine tucked Charlotte into bed, her daughter asked one more question about the morning's photographs. Mummy, do you think people will be able to tell that we really love each other, just from looking at the pictures? Catherine considered the question seriously. What do you think? She asked in return. Charlotte was quiet for a moment, thinking it over with the careful consideration she brought to most important questions. I think so, she said finally. Because it's hard to fake the way people look when they're really happy. And we were really happy this morning. Catherine kissed her daughter goodnight, marveling once again at Charlotte's intuitive understanding of complex emotional dynamics. As she turned off the bedside lamp, she reflected on the wisdom of her 9-year-old's observation. The morning's photographs would resonate with people precisely because they captured genuine emotion rather than performed happiness. The house settled into nighttime quiet, but Catherine's mind remained active as she and William completed their own evening routine. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of formally selecting and preparing one of the morning's photographs for public release. There would be discussions with their private secretary, considerations of timing and context, and all the careful planning that accompanied royal communications. But, tonight, surrounded by the peaceful evidence of their family's contentment, Catherine felt confident in their decision to share a glimpse of their private happiness with the world. The photograph they would eventually release wouldn't just show how they looked on one particular morning, it would offer proof that love could create its own perfect moments, even in the most examined and complicated of lives. New Year's Day dawned crisp and clear, bringing with it the sense of possibility that always accompanied fresh beginnings. Catherine woke early, as was her habit, and padded downstairs to the kitchen where she found William already awake, sitting at the breakfast table with a cup of coffee and his phone. The house was still quiet, their children enjoying the luxury of sleeping late on a holiday morning, and the peaceful atmosphere felt like a gift after the excitement of the previous evening's countdown celebration. Good morning, William said, looking up from his phone with the warm smile that had greeted her most mornings for the past 15 years. I've been thinking about our photograph decision. They had agreed the night before to finalize their choice about which family image to share publicly, and Catherine could see from his expression that he had been giving the matter serious consideration. Catherine poured herself coffee and settled into the chair beside him. Through the kitchen window, she could see the garden where they had played cricket the day before, the lawn still decorated with the improvised wickets that George had constructed with such engineering precision. The scene looked peaceful in the morning light, evidence of the simple pleasures that filled their family life. I keep coming back to the one where we're all laughing, William continued, echoing Catherine's own thoughts from the previous evening. There's something about it that feels completely authentic. No one is performing for the camera. We're just being ourselves. He pulled up the image on Catherine's phone, and they both studied it together in the morning light. The photograph showed their family in a moment of shared joy, their faces turned toward each other in genuine amusement. Louis's joke had caught them all off guard, and their reactions had been spontaneous and unguarded. William's head was tilted back in laughter, Catherine was smiling with her whole face, George was grinning with the particular delight that came from seeing his little brother succeed in entertaining the family, and Charlotte's expression showed pure happiness. But it was more than their individual expressions that made the photograph special. The composition naturally drew the eye toward their connection with each other, the way they leaned in, the comfortable proximity that spoke of deep familiarity, the sense that this laughter was part of an ongoing conversation rather than an isolated moment. Anyone looking at the image would immediately understand that they were witnessing genuine family affection. The lighting is perfect too, Catherine observed, noting how the soft morning sun had illuminated their faces without creating harsh shadows or unflattering angles. And Louis's lion is visible but not distractingly prominent. They had promised their youngest son that people would know his stuffed animal's name and brave character if it appeared in the published photograph. Their private secretary had scheduled a call for later that morning to discuss the logistics of releasing the photograph. There were standard protocols for royal family images, preferred social media platforms, timing considerations, and the carefully crafted captions that would accompany the visual content. But Catherine and William had learned to advocate for maintaining the authentic spirit of their personal photographs even as they moved through the formal machinery of royal communications. The sound of small feet on the stairs announced that at least one child had awakened. Louis appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair sticking up at impossible angles and his stuffed lion clutched under one arm. "Happy New Year," he announced solemnly, as if he were delivering important news rather than offering a greeting. "Happy New Year to you too, darling," Catherine replied, opening her arms for the morning hug that Louis still readily provided despite his growing independence. At 6 years old, he was beginning to show signs of the self-consciousness that would eventually characterize his older siblings' interactions with affection, but, for now, he remained enthusiastically demonstrative. "Are you going to show people the picture with courage in it?" Louis asked, proving that their previous evening's conversation had made a lasting impression. Catherine exchanged glances with William, both of them touched by their son's continued concern for his beloved stuffed animal's public debut. "We're thinking about it," William replied, using the same gentle honesty that had characterized their previous discussions about media attention. "How do you feel about that?" He had learned the importance of checking with the children before making decisions that would affect their public presentation. Louis considered the question with the seriousness that he brought to all important matters. "I think it's okay," he said finally. "But I want people to know that courage isn't just a toy. He's my friend." The distinction was clearly meaningful to Louis, and Catherine made another mental note to ensure that any public communication honored her son's attachment to his companion. George and Charlotte appeared shortly afterward, drawn by the sound of conversation and the prospect of New Year's Day breakfast. The kitchen filled with the comfortable chaos of morning routines, cereal preferences were debated, orange juice was poured, and plans for the day were discussed with the kind of democratic participation that characterized most of their family decisions. "Can we see the pictures again?" Charlotte asked, settling at the table with her breakfast. "The ones from yesterday morning?" Catherine retrieved her phone and scrolled through the images, letting each child see themselves and their family as the camera had captured them. George studied the photographs with the analytical attention he brought to most subjects that interested him. "We look different in these than in the official pictures," he observed. "More relaxed or something." His comment demonstrated his developing understanding of the different contexts in which their family was photographed. "What do you think makes them different?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious about her eldest son's perspective. George had the most experience with formal royal photography, having participated in official portraits since he was a baby, and his observations often provided valuable insights into how their public presentation was perceived. "In the official pictures, we're trying to look right," George said after thinking for a moment. "But, in these, we just look like us." His simple observation captured something that Catherine and William had been trying to articulate about their preference for the candid family photographs. The morning progressed with the kind of gentle productivity that characterized their holiday routines. Breakfast dishes were cleared, plans were made for afternoon activities, and the children dispersed to various corners of the house to pursue their individual interests. Catherine found herself with a rare hour of quiet time before their scheduled call about the photograph release. She used the time to review the technical aspects of their chosen image one more time. The resolution was excellent, the composition was strong, and the emotional content was unmistakably positive. But, more importantly, the photograph told a story that aligned with the message she and William wanted to share about their family and their approach to royal life. The image would eventually be accompanied by a simple caption wishing everyone a happy new year and expressing gratitude for the support their family had received throughout the previous year. The message would be straightforward and warm, avoiding the formal language that sometimes characterized royal communications in favor of a more personal tone. When their private secretary called at the appointed time, the conversation was brief and efficient. The photograph met all technical requirements for publication, the timing was appropriate for New Year's Day sharing, and the overall message was consistent with the family's established communication style. The image would be released on their official social media accounts later that afternoon, allowing people around the world to begin the new year with a glimpse of royal family happiness. "One thing," Catherine added before ending the call. "If anyone asks about the stuffed lion in the picture, his name is Courage and he belongs to Prince Louis. Our son wants people to know that it's not just a toy but an important friend." She could hear the smile in their secretary's voice as she promised to include that information in any media briefings. The hours between their morning decision and the afternoon release passed quietly. The children played in the garden when the weather permitted, returning indoors for hot chocolate and board games when the January air became too cold for extended outdoor activity. Catherine and William moved through their family routines with the comfortable efficiency of parents who had learned to find joy in ordinary moments. But, underlying the day's peaceful activities was a sense of anticipation about sharing their family happiness with the wider world. Catherine found herself thinking about the people who would see their photograph, families celebrating their own New Year's days, individuals who might find hope in images of connection and love, children who would see the royal family as real people rather than distant figures. The photograph would join countless other family images shared on New Year's Day across social media platforms around the world. But, it would also carry special significance as a rare glimpse into the private contentment of a family whose public role often overshadowed their personal relationships. Catherine hoped that people would see in their image a reflection of their own family's capacity for joy. Late in the afternoon, as winter light began to fade toward evening, Catherine received notification that their photograph had been published. Within minutes, her phone began showing the kind of engagement that indicated widespread positive reception. Comments poured in from people around the world, expressing appreciation for the image and offering their own New Year's wishes in return. The response was everything Catherine had hoped for and more. People commented on how genuine the family's happiness appeared, how refreshing it was to see royals looking relaxed and natural, and how the image reminded them of their own family's precious moments. Many specifically mentioned Louis's stuffed lion, with parents sharing stories of their own children's beloved toys and the importance of such friendships in young lives. "Look at this," William said, showing Catherine his phone screen. "Someone in Australia says our picture made her call her own family to arrange a reunion. And this person in Canada says seeing us laugh together reminded her to appreciate the ordinary moments with her children." The responses demonstrated the power of authentic family images to inspire connection and reflection in viewers. Charlotte, curious about the public response to their family photograph, asked to see some of the comments. Catherine scrolled through the positive messages, reading aloud the ones that were appropriate for children to hear. Charlotte was particularly delighted by comments from other children who mentioned their own stuffed animals and by the international nature of the responses. "People from all over the world are seeing our picture," Charlotte marveled. "That's kind of amazing." Her wonder at the global reach of their family image reminded Catherine of how extraordinary their circumstances were, despite how normal their daily life felt from the inside. As evening approached and the initial wave of responses to their photograph continued to grow, Catherine felt a deep sense of satisfaction about their decision to share this glimpse of their family life. The image had accomplished exactly what they had hoped. It had shown them as they genuinely were, it had brought joy to people around the world, and it had demonstrated that authentic happiness was recognizable and inspiring regardless of circumstances. The photograph would become part of the permanent record of their family's life, eventually joining albums and archives that would be studied by historians and royal watchers for decades to come. But, in this moment, it existed primarily as a gift, their family's happiness shared with a world that had responded with gratitude and recognition and joy of its own. 3 weeks after the photograph was shared with the world, Catherine found herself reflecting on its unexpected impact as she walked through London's Hyde Park on a crisp January morning. What had begun as a spontaneous family photo session had evolved into something much larger, a touchstone for conversations about family, authenticity, and finding joy in ordinary moments. The image had been shared millions of times across social media platforms, featured in newspapers around the world, and had somehow become a symbol of hope as people began navigating another new year. The morning walk had become a weekly tradition for Catherine, a chance to clear her mind and process the complex emotions that came with living a life under constant public scrutiny. Today, she was accompanied by her personal protection officer and one of her ladies-in-waiting, but the early hour and winter weather meant the park was relatively quiet. The bare trees stood like elegant sculptures against the gray sky, and the frost-covered grass crunched softly beneath her boots. As she walked, Catherine thought about the letters that had been arriving at Kensington Palace since the photograph's release. Hundreds of families had written to share their own stories of love and connection, often including their own family photographs as visual proof of the joy they found in each other's company. The letters came from every corner of the Commonwealth and beyond, handwritten notes from grandmothers in Scotland, typed emails from military families stationed overseas, carefully composed messages from children who wanted to tell Prince Louis about their own stuffed animal companions. One letter in particular had stayed with Catherine since she read it the previous week. A single mother from Birmingham had written about how seeing the royal family's obvious happiness had inspired her to start taking more photographs of her own small family. "I realized I was always waiting for special occasions to document our life," the woman had written, "but your picture reminded me that Tuesday morning breakfast can be just as precious as Christmas dinner." She had included a photograph of herself and her 2 young sons laughing over pancakes, their faces smeared with syrup but glowing with contentment. The response had reinforced something Catherine had suspected but hadn't fully articulated: that people were hungry for authentic representations of family life. In a world saturated with carefully curated social media images and celebrity photography that emphasized perfection over reality, their candid family portrait had offered something different. It had shown real people experiencing genuine emotion, complete with imperfect hair and casual clothing, and the kind of unguarded joy that couldn't be manufactured or posed. William had been equally moved by the public response. Just yesterday, during a visit to a children's hospital, a young patient had asked him about Louis's stuffed lion, wanting to know if Courage ever got scared like her own teddy bear did during medical procedures. William had spent 20 minutes discussing the important role that stuffed animals played in helping children feel brave, a conversation that would never have happened without their family photograph opening that particular door. The children had processed the attention in their characteristically individual ways. George, ever thoughtful, had asked intelligent questions about why their family picture had resonated with so many people. He was beginning to understand the unique position their family occupied in public consciousness and the responsibility that came with that visibility. Charlotte had been delighted by the creative responses their photograph had inspired: children's drawings, poems, and even a few amateur paintings that reimagined their family scene. Louis, predictably, had been most interested in the messages specifically about Courage, reading each mention of his stuffed lion with serious attention. The photograph had also sparked broader conversations about the evolving role of the monarchy in modern life. Royal commentators and constitutional experts had written extensively about how Catherine and William's approach to family photography represented a new model for royal communication, one that emphasized relatability without sacrificing dignity, accessibility without abandoning appropriate boundaries. The image had become a case study in successful modernization of traditional institutions. Catherine paused near the Serpentine, watching early morning joggers navigate the paths that wound through the park. The scene reminded her of their own family's outdoor activities: the weekend bike rides, the impromptu picnics, the countless hours spent in gardens and parks, creating the kind of memories that would sustain them through more challenging times. The photograph had captured one moment, but it represented countless others that existed beyond the frame. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Pippa, sharing an article from an American parenting magazine that had featured their family photograph alongside a discussion about the importance of documenting everyday family moments. The article included quotes from child psychologists about how family photographs helped children develop strong senses of identity and belonging. Catherine smiled at her sister's ongoing interest in tracking the global response to their image. The international reach of their photograph had surprised even Catherine's experienced communications team. News outlets in countries across 6 continents had featured the image, often using it as a springboard for discussions about their own nation's approaches to family life and public leadership. A newspaper in Japan had written about how the photograph embodied concepts of harmony and natural beauty. An editorial in a South African publication had praised the image as an example of leadership through authentic personal example. But, perhaps most meaningful to Catherine were the responses from other parents who recognized in their families' dynamics the same challenges and joys they experienced in their own homes. Comments on social media had created impromptu communities of parents sharing stories about their children's beloved toys, their own family photography attempts, and the universal experience of trying to capture fleeting moments of happiness. A group of amateur photographers in Canada had organized a challenge inspired by their family portrait, encouraging people to document authentic joy in their own families without staging or extensive preparation. The resulting collection of photographs had been both heartwarming and artistically impressive, proving that genuine emotion translated beautifully through cameras of all skill levels. As Catherine continued her walk, she thought about the responsibility that came with their family's public platform. Every image they shared, every public appearance they made, every choice they made about how to present themselves had the potential to influence how other people thought about family, duty, and finding balance in challenging circumstances. The success of their New Year's photograph had reinforced her belief that authenticity was more powerful than perfection in creating meaningful connections with the public. The children's schools had also reported interesting responses to the photograph's popularity. George's classmates had expressed new curiosity about his family life, but their questions had been thoughtful rather than intrusive. Charlotte's friends had shown particular interest in her relationship with her brothers, apparently inspired by the obvious affection visible in the family portrait. Lewis's teacher had mentioned that several children had brought their own comfort objects to school for sharing time, encouraged by seeing Prince Lewis's pride in his stuffed lion. Catherine's weekly meeting with her private secretary the following day would include discussions about future family photography decisions. The success of their candid approach had opened new possibilities for how they might share their family life with the public while maintaining appropriate privacy boundaries. They were considering more behind-the-scenes glimpses of their charitable work, more documentation of their children's interests and achievements, and perhaps more insight into how they balanced their royal duties with their family priorities. The photograph had also influenced their personal family practices. Inspired by the positive response to their spontaneous photo session, Catherine had begun taking more candid pictures of their daily life. She documented George's intense concentration while building model airplanes, Charlotte's elaborate theatrical performances for family audiences, and Lewis's ongoing adventures with courage in various household settings. These images might never be shared publicly, but they were creating an increasingly rich visual record of their children's authentic personalities. As her walk neared its end, Catherine found herself thinking about the lasting lessons their family's experience with this photograph had provided. They had learned that people appreciated honesty more than polish, that vulnerability could coexist with dignity, and that sharing genuine happiness had the power to multiply joy rather than diminish it through exposure. The image would eventually take its place in the historical record of their family and their era. Future biographers would use it as evidence of their relationship dynamics, historians would analyze it for insights into early 21st century royal communication strategies, and their own children would probably look back on it with the mixture of fondness and mild embarrassment that characterized most people's relationships with childhood photographs. But, in this moment, 3 weeks after its release, the photograph continued to serve its most important function, reminding people that love was recognizable across all boundaries of geography, culture, and circumstance. It had proven that authentic human emotion could transcend the formal structures that sometimes made royal life seem distant and irrelevant to ordinary experience. Catherine's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from William sharing a news story about a photography exhibition in Australia that was featuring family portraits inspired by their New Year's image. Local families had submitted their own candid photographs, creating a display that celebrated the universal themes of connection and joy that their original image had captured. As she made her way back toward Kensington Palace, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey their family photograph had taken. What had begun as a spontaneous moment of happiness shared among the 4 people she loved most had become a gift to countless families around the world. The image had reminded people to look for joy in ordinary moments, to document their own family's authentic connections, and to believe that genuine love was worth celebrating regardless of circumstances. The morning's walk had given Catherine the perspective she needed to understand the true impact of their decision to share that glimpse of their family life. The photograph hadn't just documented their happiness, it had given other people permission to recognize and celebrate their own. In a world that often seemed divided by differences, their image had highlighted the common ground of family love that connected all human experience. Walking through the palace gates, Catherine realized that their New Year's photograph had accomplished something remarkable. It had proven that sometimes the most powerful form of leadership was simply living an authentic life with courage, joy, and genuine love for the people closest to you. The image would continue to inspire families around the world, but its most important legacy might be the reminder it provided that happiness, when genuinely felt and generously shared, had the power to touch lives in ways that extended far beyond the original moment of joy.